I thought of getting an A+, not as me gaining 90%, because if you guys don't know, 90% and above in a subject is A+. I didn't think of it as gaining 90 marks. I thought of it as not losing 10 marks. So every test or assignment you do, you just want to not lose as many marks as you can.
Yeah.
So that was the aim going into each test.
Yeah. My advice is be confident, focus on yourself, have your energy and your eyes locked on a goal, and try your best. It may come, it might not come, but if you want it the most, you can have it, right?
Yeah, that's true. I'm telling you this now because I thought into it after I got into mid, actually. But I honestly had no plan B, which is not a good idea.
I think it's the same though. I was so focused on my plan A. Like, I'm just like, I'm not going to need a plan B because my plan A is going to work.
Yeah.
And it did work. You know, I mean, it worked for your case.
Yeah. I remember like throughout the year when I was studying and I was feeling like on like my 13th hour of study, I was just dead. And if you guys have seen like that Kanye quote where it's like, everybody wanted to know what I would do if I didn't win. That quote was ringing in my head, man. And I never thought of a plan B because I never wanted to go there.
Welcome to the very first episode of Endoscope, the brand new podcast where we look into the guts of educational topics and explore things that matter to those who's interested in education, healthcare, and business. My name is Harry and I'm a fifth-year medical student. Joining me today is a current second-year medical student at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and he entered medical school through the undergraduate pathway. So we're going to be sharing a bit about our experiences going through Premed in New Zealand. So that will be health science first year in your case and biomedical science first year in my case. So yeah, if you could just give us a quick 10-second introduction of yourself, what's your name, what you do, and where you're from.
Sure. So my name is Khusrav. I'm of Persian descent, and my family is originally from India, and I was born here in New Zealand. I got in through medicine, like Harry said, through the health sciences pathway. I've wanted to be a doctor ever since I was about 12 to 13 years old, and I'm so glad that I finally made it, and I'm here on this podcast.
Yeah, welcome on the podcast, man. I should have mentioned when you came in, congratulations on getting into med.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for having me on the podcast, man.
It's like, it's still to me to this day, sounds like I've never achieved anything in the past 3 years, but it's still to this day getting into med school the biggest achievement in my life.
For sure.
So yeah, let's just start off by talking a bit about your sort of academic background and what school you went to and how your grades are in high school, so that the people watching, they can have an idea of a reference for comparison.
Sure. So I went to Pakuranga College, best college, and I got grades mostly excellence. I was a pretty much straight excellent student in level 2. Level 3, we had COVID, so I didn't sit my exams, but I pretty much got excellences throughout the year. A couple merits here or there, but that was sort of the range that I was looking at. I went into my pre-med year, I wanted to aim for those A's, A+, and thankfully I got a 9.0 GPA in my pre-med year. And
the flex.
Little flex. And yeah, it was difficult, but that was the background that I sort of came from.
True. So, like you mentioned, in year 13, it's mostly excellences, right? That you've got, yeah.
Definitely.
So, in terms of the volume of content, how would you compare the difficulty of year 13 compared to first year?
Yeah, it's a difficult comparison to make, but it's definitely one that can be made. I think the way that I explain it to a few of the students that I tutor for Premed is that it's almost the equivalent of like 2 Biosci lectures, which is a content-heavy subject in semester 1 of Biomed and Health Science, is equivalent to about 1 external exam in NCA for biology. That's sort of the way that I put it. Now, here or there, I could be wrong, but that's the level of content. And if you think about it, we spend about 4 to 5 weeks studying an exam for biology in NCA. And 2 lectures in Biosci is done in less than a week in Premed.
Yeah, someone told me it's 1 content-heavy Biosci lecture is like a whole internal.
That seems about right. Yep.
Is that about right? I'm not too sure. I didn't do NCEA. I did Cambridge myself. So a bit about my background. It's my year 13 grades just pretty much A stars. And would you say that once you get into Biomed, it's okay to say that if you're one of the top students in your high school, but do you feel like once you get into Biomed, everyone's sort of on the same level, or is it? Do you feel like you're at an advantage, or?
I felt that it was very much at the same level. I wasn't by any means one of the top students in my high school, I wouldn't say. For example, I wasn't a top scholar or anything like that.
Sure. Neither.
Yeah,
exactly. I didn't get any scholarships or anything.
Yeah, and I've heard of people in Biomed who have got like almost gotten the Prime Minister's Prize for like academic excellence and things like that, and they're very much on the same level as I am, and I'm very much on the same level as anybody else who got merits or anything in NCA. I've heard stories about people who were just barely passing NCA and they got almost all A pluses in their biomed or health science year. So I think that it's definitely a level playing field. I think something that gave me an advantage was study techniques and work ethic that I built in NCA. So if I had to go back, I would have put in the same amount of hours that I did in NCA. I wouldn't have given myself a break.
Sorry, you wouldn't?
I would have. I wouldn't do anything different in my college experience. I would have still put in those hard yards to get where I am, because those study techniques and the work ethic that I built along the way put me maybe at a little bit of a higher level than someone who was just passing. But it doesn't mean that you need to get excellences in high school to be able to make it into med.
Yeah, just because basically in New Zealand, all you take into your first year into university is your rank score. Like, as long as you meet the rank scores, the grades in the particular subjects or what scholarships you've done, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. And so, okay, just before we go into the next topic, why medicine, and how long have you wanted to be a doctor?
Sure. So I think since I was in about...
And just before you answer, you know, it doesn't have to be an interview answer, just
for real?
Yeah, just for real. For like, it's over now.
Okay, good. Okay, fine. I won't give my MMI structured answer.
Yeah, you don't have to. We all know what answer it is, because, yeah.
Okay. Honestly, the reasons. Yeah. I wanted to do med since about year 9 or year 10. Okay. It's a job that's respected in my community. Being from Persian background, sort of an Indian heritage as well, there's 3 choices: engineering, law, and doctor. So I only had 3 options.
Yeah. But, you know, doctor's definitely up there.
Doctor's
it's above the other 2. It's still above the other 2 in terms of like an Asian perspective thinking.
Definitely. Yeah. But my parents never pressured me into anything. I was never pressured into either one of those 3. I could honestly do whatever I wanted, and I'm grateful for that. But something drew me to being a doctor. I think I've been to the medical sector quite a lot, with my grandma falling ill. I've had a lot of injuries in the past from gym and from sports. And I've seen that the people that I went to for my injuries that had a medical degree were able to help me in ways that other people couldn't. Physiotherapists had a very limited amount that they could help me with, which was another career that I was considering. Yep. And people with a medical degree could help me to a greater extent, I felt. I also just feel like the way that you can help people when they're in their most desperate time. I saw my grandma's illness, what it did to my family, what it did to me and my mental health. Yeah. And I saw that health really is your wealth. Like, health is everything. Definitely. And a doctor can give sort of a ray of light in a time that you're at your absolute darkest, when you're in poor health. Yeah. And I feel that I want to bring my kind of a personality that I hope is empathetic, caring, kind, understanding. And I want to bring that into a job like a doctor and see what kind of an impact I can make. It's my honest answer.
Yeah. I feel like that's more of an MMI answer than real answer, but, you know, I'm
sure MMI answer is genuine.
I'm sure it's a real answer. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. For me, it's, just to be completely honest, it's just that everything that you've said, plus the fact that, you know, when you're at year 11, year 12, you start looking into careers, and I'm good at science, and I guess I'm sort of smart, you know, and so medicine's the top choice for people who are smart and good at science, right? And so I went for it, and I had the grades for it, so, you know, here I am, and I genuinely enjoyed it. It's not like some people, they got into it and they realized that it's not the career for them. Luckily for me, I did and I do very much enjoy it, and we'll get into it.
I considered physiotherapy, but the money wasn't sort of where I wanted, and the progression, the career progression wasn't there.
Yeah, I think career progressions are, in terms of like specializations and how far you can go into a particular field, that's definitely something that I was thinking when I was picking the career. Yeah, law could be one as well, but I'm not really a Englishy or literary person.
Me neither. I don't like to read, so law would have been tough.
Yeah. Okay, and so a bit about your preparation for first year. What sort of preparation did you do in year 13?
Sure. So in my year 13 year, I spent a lot of my time doing UKAT. So I tried to not obsess over my NCA level 3 exams too much. I already knew I almost had the rank score, and I basically needed to pass those. So I still did well in them, but I focused on UKAT in my year 13 year, which is great because I was rubbish at UKAT naturally. And then in my holidays, I spent a lot of the time pre-studying some of the content. I used a site called JTT, which was really good. Unfortunately, they're shut down now, but they had a lot of the content, and they made their own videos on how to teach it. So I learned some of the content that way, and I built on my study techniques. So any textbooks that are widely available that you can use, I would say use those to pre-study.
Which one would that be?
What textbooks are there? There are...
I think there's one called
A&P.
I thought there's one called Tortora.
Oh, Tortora Derrickson? Yeah.
That's the actual prescribed textbook by the uni, right?
I think so. And then there's one like Anatomy and Physiology textbook. I forget the name, like 13th edition. But those are all available online. So it's not like you need to buy them hardcover by any means. Don't buy them. You can Control F using a textbook online.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the way that I prepared. I just tried to build my study techniques, and I felt that was a lot more important than actually pre-studying the content.
Sure.
Just getting used to that workload.
Yeah. By study techniques, do you mind going into a bit more specific?
Yeah,
like
sure.
What kind? Yeah.
So I used an app called Anki that a lot of people are familiar with. You've heard it a million times.
Yeah, I've heard it.
And
I've actually, sorry to interrupt, I've actually never used Anki in my life.
Really?
So
wow, hats off.
We'll go into that, but tell me about it.
Yeah, Anki was like my everything in Premed. I would put all my information onto it, and I guess a lot of people use Anki, but only a few are really successful in using it. So I think what I did was I paired that with flowcharts, mind maps, that a lot of people advise me to do.
Yep.
And it's not, I think making flowcharts and mind maps is easy to say, but doing it well is a completely different story.
Yeah.
A lot of people have a hierarchical structure to their flowcharts. They start with the higher, like the largest subtopic, they go down, 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 down. But there are different ways to make flowcharts and mind maps. And I watched a few videos of Justin Sung, shout out. And then that paired with my Anki was sort of what led to a lot of my success, I think.
Yeah. Good for you, man. He's the genius of studying in medical school now, because I don't use any of those techniques. Yeah. I find Anki, it's more of it's just taking advantage of spaced repetition, right?
Definitely.
Like, it's that forgetting curve, and you just keep on repeating. We'll get into that. So let's just focus on our experience in first year. So let's talk about the first days and weeks leading up to the first test. How was it? Like the first day walking into the lecture theatre, like the first week, and how was that?
Giving me PTSD, man.
You go on, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I guess my first day, orientation is technically my first day.
Okay.
And that was a really great experience. So if you're considering not going to orientation, think again. Definitely go. Because some of the people that I met there, I stayed with throughout Biomed or Health Science. And they're still my friends now, which is pretty crazy because I met them literally on the first day. My first proper day of lectures was interesting. I went in person to my lectures, which I didn't go in person the rest of the semester. We can maybe talk about that a bit later.
Yeah.
And I found BioSci was difficult to keep up with the content. It was an instant overload of content for me. And I just didn't understand what was examinable, what wasn't.
Yeah.
And that was a bit daunting. Chemistry was fully okay on the first day. The lecturer is really nice. She walks through everything. Pop health was very chill as well. So most of my subjects were fine.
Is it still BioSci, the first lecture, still Anthony Phillips, cells and tissues?
It was systems lecture, and I just thought this is so much.
There's a bunch of people outside the lecture theatre. It's like it's like people going into a stadium to watch a concert, right?
Literally, like people hoarding right there, and you gotta like push your way through.
Do you manage to make it into the actual lecture theatre, or do you have to go to overflow?
I went I'm a small guy, so I just like wriggled my way through, got to the front. I didn't know anybody. And so I was like, if I'm here, I may as well sit in the proper lecture theatre. I didn't push in, but
No, it's just that in my year, for the first 2.5 weeks, they opened an overflow theatre because there's too many people.
We did that too.
So
there are so many people in the first couple weeks.
I've never been to the overflow. I've always managed to squeeze in.
Us small guys can squeeze in.
And then for chemistry, it's still is it Caitlin?
She's awesome.
And then pop health,
Rod Jackson.
Yeah, Rod Jackson.
The man
and,
himself.
Yeah, whatever his name is, the Asian guy who's the course
Dennis.
coordinator. Dennis, yeah. They're all nice people.
Yeah.
Nice people, but not so nice when writing the exams and marking you.
Sometimes they're not. No. Some are, some not. Yeah, so that was first day. Leading up to first tests, it was really nerve-wracking. I was very scared, to be honest. I've never done a university test before.
Yeah.
I've never... go on.
The first test was the Pop Health Test 1, right? Or was it
might have been Biosci, I think.
Biosci, okay.
Which is pretty scary. I've never even done an MCQ exam in my life since like primary, because NCA doesn't do MCQ. So that was different as well. And Biosci, I found it quite good in the exam. I studied really hard for it. We got a cheat sheet in our tests, which was really helpful, which is different from your year.
I don't know there's a thing called cheat sheet.
Yeah, I think it's a new thing. God. So look out for that. So I started developing my cheat sheet really early. Some people would leave it till like the last day to make their cheat sheet. I was not that person.
Sure.
And yeah, leading up to test was really scary. Luckily, all my tests went quite well. I wanted Pop Health to go a bit better, but it is what it is. And I just think with tests, they're so important. People underestimate how important a test 1 is for a subject.
It's because test 1's like at least 25% of your grade.
Basically.
Some of it's like, I think, Biosci, it
30.
must have been 30%. Something like that.
Yeah, so like getting those marks on the table is super important.
Yeah.
And the way that I sort of approached health science was that I thought of getting an A+, not as me gaining 90%, because if you guys don't know, 90% and above in a subject is A+. I didn't think of it as gaining 90 marks. I thought of it as not losing 10 marks. So every test or assignment you do, you just want to not lose as many marks as you can.
Yeah.
So that was the aim going into each test.
Yeah. And the thing about tests is, like, they're worth 30%, say for Biosci, 30%, and the whole course is 100%. 30% is the test. And then 20 to 30% would be like the extra sorts of projects and, online things that you do. So that means 40% would be the final exam, right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So if you score, say, 86% in your first test, that means that given that you score above or around 90% in your other stuff, your projects, your assignments, you'll have to get like 93 or 94 in the exam, which is even harder than the test because it covers the whole semester. And the questions, it's not just MCQs, it's actually short answered questions. So that means that you have to learn everything, including your test, the content that's covered in your test, into even more detail. So that just stresses how important the first month is. Like, yeah, how would you say in terms of content? Do you find it difficult to keep up or?
Yeah, I did find it difficult in some subjects. I noticed that Cambridge people had a huge advantage in Chem 110. So coming from NCA, I guess I didn't have that so-called advantage, but I still found it fine to keep up. Biosci, I think if you're going into Premed, you'll realize it's the instant oh crap subject.
I think Biosci is the main one. Like, yeah.
Like you notice straight away, you're like, oh, this is Premed.
Like the first 4 lectures of Biosci is pretty much equivalent to the whole of year 13 Cambridge A2 biology course if someone out there is doing it. So I don't know if it's equal to NCEA level 3 or something.
Yeah, it seems about right. Yeah, it's a lot of content. But with that said, there are techniques that you need to build so that you can combat those. Because there's a lot of content, but honestly, if you have the weapons in your arsenal to deal with them, you'll be fully fine. So that was what I sort of built in my holidays to give me sort of a buffer. So I knew some of the content, which helped. And I had the study techniques that allowed me to keep up. And that way I didn't fall behind almost ever throughout the year, thankfully. But there are a lot of people who, for example, start off the first few lectures and they try to write their own notes from scratch. Now that's doable. Lots of people do it and get A+. But for me, writing my own notes in a subject like Biosci that was so content heavy, writing them from scratch just took me hours for one lecture. And it clearly wasn't working. So I think be able to change your study techniques, adapt, and preferably do that in your spare time before uni starts so that you have the right stuff going into it.
Well, man, seems like you've done all the right things. The universe has rewarded you for doing all the right things now. Yeah, I didn't do any preparation going into first year. All I did was 3 weeks before the semester started, I just got some lecture slides for Biosci from someone in the year above, and I got the gate notes, and I just read over it. Yeah, that's all I did. I had no study techniques. I studied So let's talk a bit about the hours of studying. Like how many hours did you study a day during first year?
Yeah, that's a pretty commonly asked question.
Yeah.
I guess the way that I never counted the hours like anybody else.
Okay.
I counted the hours that I wasn't spending studying. So I would get 7.5 hours of sleep every night, like very routine. It would never be more or less. And to be honest with you, I would wake up at 5 every day, which is not necessary by any means, but that was how I studied. I chose to wake up early when my brain is most productive.
Sure.
And then I slept at like a very normal time, like 9:30, 10, to give me enough sleep.
Yeah.
So the hours I studied was probably about 12 to 13 hours a day. And as I said, I counted it more like how many hours was I not spending studying.
So it's 12 to 13 hours, including lectures, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
And maybe like
12 to 13 hours on top of lectures.
No, imagine.
No.
So like, so there was like 2 to 3 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours in the day where I would spend, I don't know, scrolling on Instagram Reels, or messaging friends, stuff like that.
I studied a bit more. I did about 14 hours a day, 14 to 15 in semester 1, just because that semester 1 it's more stressful, right? Because you've got your 3 core papers. But then once that's sorted, you can kind of cruise a bit in semester 2.
Yeah. Semester 1 is the one that you need to ace.
Yeah.
So study those like long 13, 14 hours in semester 1.
If you don't need to, you don't have to do that. But I had no study techniques. So I just, it's really important to develop your study habits and study techniques. Yeah, I just read over lectures and just sort of memorized them. Yeah, for some reason I still managed to get some good grades, but
what's crazy is someone with really good study techniques could go back and get similar grades to us or better grades with like 8 hours of study if they had the techniques in place. Yeah.
And then in semester 2 I kind of cruised off a bit, so I went from maybe 14 to 15 down to maybe 8. You
can afford some of that.
Yeah.
Because only 1 core paper in semester 2, which is very forgiving. The most difficult core paper probably. But yeah, you can chill a little bit more in semester 2. So it's not like you're spending an entire year slogging your ass off. Like it's the first semester, and then second semester is really hard as well. I put in similar amount of hours. But once you've got the first semester in the bag with hopefully A's and A pluses, then you can sort of lax it a bit for the second semester.
That's the difference between Otago and Auckland Premed, right? Because that's part of the reason that I chose Auckland to go for medical school. It's just like in Otago, it's a bit confusing. Like they've got 7 papers. Like there's 8 papers. There's 7 of them that counts, and you have to do very well in them. And it's like really intense the whole year. So that's part of the reason that I chose Auckland. And is there a particular reason that you picked Auckland over Otago? Or
I think it boils down to 2 reasons for me. Firstly, moving away. I didn't want to if I didn't have to. And also the fact that Otago doesn't have an interview. So the UKAT is weighted 33% for Otago, and it's weighted 15% for Auckland.
I always thought at Otago it's a threshold.
And it's a threshold, but it's like you need to score above 10th or 20th percentile in some of them, which most people would be able to do. 80% of people can do that. So that wasn't too much of a concern for me, but it was more just the fact that I think I'm decent at my MMI interviews, and my UKAT is absolutely garbage. So like if I had to put 33% into UKAT, I don't know if I would have gotten in. So
sure. If you don't mind sharing what percentile do you get in UKAT?
Sure.
You don't have to.
No, that's fine. I got it in the 80th percentile, which is like...
Same.
Oh, really?
Yeah, high five.
There you go.
There you go.
Which is respectable, but like... I heard so many people got like 95th. I know a few people 99th percentiles.
Yeah.
But to be honest, you don't need that to get into mid.
Yeah.
You can get in with a good GPA, an average, maybe even below average UKAT, and just a good MMI.
Yeah, I think that's for New Zealand context, yes. For
definitely,
Australian,
different story.
It's a different story. Like sometimes it's like minimum 90th percentile for Australia. Yeah. But a bit about the UKAT, it's actually, I think at Otago, they threshold each section. So if you scored under the 10th percentile for, I think it was decision making, quantitative reasoning, and abstract reasoning, if you score below the 10th for those or below the 20th for verbal reasoning, you're out. So it doesn't matter how good your GPA is. doesn't matter what however high you score in the other sections, you're out. So for me, actually, it's lucky that I came to Auckland because I scored under the 20th percentile for verbal reasoning. But I scored really high for the other sections, which is what brought me up to 80th percentile. So if I had applied at Otago during my pre-med year, I would have gotten in.
There you go.
Yeah, despite getting a 9 GPA. So I think it's slightly harder at Otago just because the fact that the whole year has to be highly intensive. Plus the UKAT, it's a bit, you can prepare for the UKAT, but it's like you're just not sure. Sometimes it can go well, sometimes it can not go well.
And I think, but maybe before you make your choice about Otago and UOA, maybe look into the UKAT a bit, see where your strengths lie. Yeah. Because if you're like us, I scored pretty low for verbal reasoning as well. I haven't been someone who read as a kid. My reading comprehension is pretty trash. Good enough for med, hopefully, but not good enough for the UKAT. Doing the UKAT, I would realize, okay, Otago is definitely not for me. So I think look into that before you choose.
Yeah.
And also, we should mention one more thing. A lot of people don't know, but situational judgment is counted in, I'm pretty sure, Otago and UOA.
Oh, is it counted now? In my year, it wasn't counted.
Oh, really?
No.
It's definitely counted for us.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
so it's counted for us, so it's weighted just the same as any other part of the UKAT. So keep that in mind. So that's why my score got into the 80th percentile. Without my situational judgment section, which was 95th percentile, my whole grade would have dropped a little bit. It's worth noting.
Sure. For me, I chose Auckland as well because there's an interview. I feel like it's an assessment that allows me to sort of showcase my qualities and my personality because I'm quite an outgoing person and show them as my potential as a colleague in a way because the people who interviews you, they're fellow doctors and lecturers. So it would have been something that Otago couldn't see in me, and that's an advantage. I feel like the interview could have added more points for me in a way.
Definitely. I find it mind-boggling how Otago doesn't have an interview, to be honest with you, because, not to knock them or anything, but you are trying to pick doctors, and doctors are way more than brains and UKAT skills and GPA.
That's okay. They're definitely the second best medical school
100%.
in the country. Yeah. I'm biased though, so
it's fine to be serious.
That's okay. Yeah. All right. Now let's talk a bit about, because you mentioned that you stayed at home, right? I think
that's right.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about how did you manage studying at home, or did you come to lectures during the year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my plan throughout the year, I sort of talked to a lot of people that got into med, and the consensus that I built was that I was going to stay at home, so not in halls, and that I was going to go to the first few lectures of each subject. So I went to the first 2 biosci lectures, first 2 pop health, first 2 chem, and after that, I didn't show up to a lecture for the rest of the year. So that was the way that I did it. I found that really good for me because in lockdown, I would learn really well, just learning online, and I actually learned way better than listening to a teacher. So I think my strengths lied.
That was your high school, right?
That was in high school. In year 12 and 13, I learned really well just on my own. So that way I could pause, start and stop the lectures. And even going to lectures, you have to rewatch some parts, I think, in order to get A+. So that way I avoided ever rewatching a lecture. So I just did the lecture one time through, did it well, and I never looked at that lecture again. I would just review my notes, but I never rewatched.
The best thing is you get to pause and rewatch for the parts that you don't understand well, and you can speed things up and control your own speed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's something that I find definitely really helpful with recordings. Personally, I still went to lectures, but I used them as as a way to prime myself. So when I was in first year, I wouldn't prepare for the content. I would go to the lecture to prime myself. So I'd go to the lecture as a preparation. So I would just sit at the lecture and just listen and try to absorb as much as I can. And then when I get back to my hall, I stayed in halls. So then I would go to the recording and then hone in on the bits that I didn't really understand. So I find that being a really good way to maximize the use of time, just because there are parts in a lecture where it's quite easy and conceptually easy, but you still have to put in effort to memorize things and recall the facts. But yeah, that's how I find the most useful as well.
So you wouldn't write anything in the lectures? You just listen?
Yeah, I would just listen.
That's crazy.
And then I'd print out the lecture slides. I'd have it in front of me. If there's some really important things that the lecturer said that wasn't on the slides, then I'd write it down.
Oh, okay.
And then when I get back to my hall, I'd review it using the recording.
Nice.
Yeah, so in that way, I get the information going through my brain 2 times. Yeah.
That's a good idea. I've heard that from a few people. I just watched a YouTube video where it's like, try to find as many different ways to review content. And yeah, like rewatching the lecture twice, almost in different ways, is a really good way to do that. Yeah.
So you didn't go to hall, right?
No, so I was at home because I didn't get the top achiever scholarship that I was gunning for.
Did you get any FOMO?
No, actually. I told myself that, fully no, actually. Like I told myself that if I got it, it was going to be a blessing because no travel time, which is huge.
Sure.
If I didn't get it, well, I'm religious, so I thought like God has a plan for me and that this is the way that I'm going to get in. Yeah. And I think for me, for my personality, I was right. I think me being in halls, my social battery would have run out pretty quickly. I'm someone who's like, I think I'm an extrovert, but I don't know if I can be around people for so long. Because, like, for example, in camp at school, it's probably not a good analogy. You know halls best. But at camp, I would, like, be with all my friends, and they would sleep, you know, sort of in their own dorms. But after a while, I was like, okay, I need to go home now. So, yeah, I think my social battery would have drained. And I think staying at home has its pros, it has its cons. But how'd you find it?
You need quite good self-control as well when you're in halls, especially I was at O'Rourke Hall, so that's the most rowdy hall. Everyone around me, though, there's 2 other people on my floor who's doing, I think it was Biomed and HealthSci, and then there's another 10 or 15 people, just 10 or 15 people in the hall who's trying to get into medical school as well. So, and everyone else is doing, you know, most of them's music and arts and commerce, and their life actually gets better in uni, whereas our life's completely different, you know. By uni I mean in first year, because
it's a completely different thing.
It's completely different. Their life actually gets better and your life just become a misery. But halls was good in terms of it's more so just the distance to uni. That's the only thing that really helped. I did go to lots of social events for the first sort of 2 weeks, but then after that, uni starts hitting, and I just had to put my head down and kind of grind, you know. And not many people, especially if you're in a hall that's quite rowdy, not many people understand your goals and your purpose. So it's quite difficult if you don't have that self-control and you don't have that discipline.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I could imagine it maybe slightly easier if you're in a hall like Grafton Hall, where everyone around you is kind of, you know, studious and having the same goals, which could be another problem because some people might be, you know, competitive and they might not approach things in a good mindset. But yeah, that's a talk for another topic.
Yeah, no, I think there's heaps of pros and cons. Like something else that I found was just having my family support around me 24/7 was amazing. Some people don't have the luxury of that because they're coming from some other parts of New Zealand that are not in Auckland. But I'm thankful that my family's based in Auckland. So when I needed them most in this pre-med year, when I was at my lowest sometimes, like I had them right there in the room next to me. I had home-cooked meals from mum, which was great. And I would say just the only downside was the travel time, that I had to spend like an hour driving into uni, which, being in halls would have been nice for that reason.
Yeah, sure. What's the main thing that brings you stress in first year?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think falling behind is something that is extremely stressful.
Sure.
In any degree, everyone agrees falling behind is stressful.
I don't know about some degrees that, you know, like we said, there's particular degrees where their life gets better after uni. I'm not sure if falling behind is a stress for them.
Maybe not. But I know like friends in engineering, they fall behind a lot. And falling behind can be stressful. And I found that was something that brought on a lot of stress. So I tried to not fall behind. I would keep up on every lecture. And one thing that I would never allow is for falling behind. Sure. Because once it happens, content starts piling up. You find ways to cope. So you study less efficiently, or you study more efficiently, but maybe not as much goes into your brain. You're not studying the way that you want because you're just trying to play catch up.
It's so important to be consistent, right?
Definitely.
Like, especially in biomed or health science first year in pre-med, just because when they examine you, the exam could be on a Friday and the lecture on Wednesday or Thursdays also included.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
yeah, so it's also examined. So if you're behind by already even 2 or 3 lectures, that means the day before the exam you have to study those 2 plus the one that just came up, and then you have to go into the exam knowing everything the day after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can see how falling behind is just not going to give you enough time
Yeah.
to quality learn all the information.
How about the competition around you? Does that bring you stress? Or
I went into health science sort of thinking that it was going to be pretty toxic, because pre-med culture, I've heard, is very toxic. Like,
Sure.
I've heard stories of people sabotaging other people's aspirin synthesis experiments.
that
in
happened to
chem.
me. Actually,
There you
it's someone. Whoever you're watching, screw you.
You made it.
I made it. I hope you're not sat in the same lecture theatre as me, but someone turned off the heating machine for my test tube.
Wow.
And then I found out, and I was just, why would you do that? But I ended up getting 99% yield anyway. I think it was 98.6% yield.
Oh my
So,
god. I got like the worst yield in my aspirin synthesis. Bro, I got the lowest mark for that. Thankfully made it up in a later lab, but oh my god, went home and like cried that day. Like, oh no, it's over.
Oh.
But the competition, I've actually found, like, there was competition, but it was not toxic for me, surprisingly. I don't think I ran into one toxic person. I met like amazing people along the way. Maybe that's because I took health science. The only difference is the non-cause.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found the people were great. The competition, I don't think it brought me much stress.
Sure.
I think I was sort of battling myself and battling the grades rather than other people.
Sure. Were you confident that you're going to get in?
I don't think I was confident until the end of Sim 1.
Okay.
When I saw my grades and I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And I knew the MMI was coming up. I believed that I had the skills to do well in that as well.
Sure.
But I wasn't confident until I saw those exam grades in Sim 1.
If you didn't get in, what would you have done?
I guess we'll never know.
What's your plan B?
My plan B was physiotherapy was definitely on the charts for me. But like I mentioned earlier, there are reasons that I didn't want to necessarily go into that profession.
Well, you couldn't do physiotherapy at UA, right?
Yeah, you'd have to restart at AUT.
Okay.
So that was an option, restarting.
Okay.
Probably my main backup was health science postgrad, and
Sure.
applying again. If I didn't get in postgrad diploma, applying again, which is a lengthy process, unfortunately. But I think I would have been willing to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the whole year, I kept telling people when they asked me about my backups, like, I'm telling you this now because I thought into it after I got into med, actually.
Right.
But I honestly had no plan B, which is not a good idea.
I think it's the same though. I was so
Yeah.
focused on my plan A. Like, I'm just like, I'm not going to need a plan B because my plan A is going to work.
Yeah.
And it did work. I'm sure, I mean, it worked for your case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there is value maybe in thinking of a plan B if your grades are not there. But there's also value in just focusing in on plan A because you can cross that bridge when you get to it. You have a whole 3 months worth of holidays if you unfortunately don't get into med. And you can think about your plan B then. I remember throughout the year when I was studying and I was feeling like on my 13th hour of study, I was just dead. And if you guys have seen that Kanye quote where it was everybody wanted to know what I would do if I didn't win. That quote was ringing in my head, man. And I never thought of a plan B because I never wanted to go there.
Sure. Yeah. If I had to come up with a plan B, it would have been the same thing. It would have been a postgraduate, probably Bachelor of Science, Physiology. I know that's the one that's probably the hardest, but
Yeah.
there was a few of my friends who was in my year at the time, who didn't get in, and they're in second year now, so they made it in now. But they went for Bachelor of Science, Physiology, and they ended up getting in. So yeah. That's probably the one that I would have gone for, just because if you do a physiology and you get your second and third year knowledge in physiology, it's basically you're set for med because it's pretty much the same content.
Yeah, very well set up.
Yeah.
I think something worth talking about as well is if you're really gunning for med, and a lot of people are, if you don't get in, you would have to consider postgrad. And there are a lot of different postgrad options. So they're all weighted evenly. So getting a 9.0 in, physiology compared to getting a 9.0 in health science postgrad, you still have a 9.0. So picking your degree strategically with what you're good at is really important. But also some degrees are harder than others. That's great that your friends got into physiology. I know of a guy who didn't get in through physiology because he found the content really hard.
Yeah.
And even biomed, health science, I've heard, can be pretty tough.
What's the easiest? Do you know?
Easiest, I've heard psychology and health science.
Yeah, that's the two I've heard as well. Yeah.
So I would say if you're already doing health science, it's honestly great for postgrad.
Yep.
That's an advantage to picking health science over biomed. Biomed postgrad is pretty grueling.
Yeah, but can't people switch from biomed first year to psychology major?
Yeah, you can.
And do 2 extra years, and they get a BSc, Bachelor of Science in Psychology, and then reapply.
Do they have to take extra papers though if they do that?
I've got no idea. I'm asking you just.
There are some complications with that, I think. I think that's an option. Don't quote me, but there might be some complications, like you didn't take the first year psych papers or something. So now advancing, you have to take 5 papers in a semester.
Or maybe do a summer school or something.
Or summer school, which is a bit rough considering the year you've already had.
Yeah.
And now you need A+ to A's on 5 papers in a semester rather than 4.
Yeah, true.
So I guess when you're picking health science versus biomed, maybe consider plan B at that point.
Yeah. Are there anything that you regretted or you would have done differently in first year, or any advice that you'd give to any high schoolers or people who's interested in getting into medical school in New Zealand?
Yeah, definitely. I would say obsess over the things that you can control, and the things that you can't control them. So, for example, labs, like chem labs. Like I mentioned, in my aspirin synthesis, which is the very first lab that you do, I got the lowest yield, like in the class, or at least in my group. And the yield that you get, the amount of aspirin you get, determines your grade. And I already lost an entire % in my very first chem lab, which was really tough because, like I mentioned before, you can only lose 10%.
You could have just made up the yield, right?
Yeah, but they grade it. They look at it.
Okay,
so
sure.
actually you can't.
Yeah.
Like,
no, back in my year, you can make it up. Yeah.
What?
They don't look at the thing.
They look at it now.
Yeah. Oh, they look at it now. Wow. Okay.
There was no. I was low-key like looking for ways to weasel
They're
out
going hardcore now.
Real, yeah. And then so that was something like I could have, I don't know, maybe prepared a bit better for, so I wouldn't have lost any marks. And then like pop health, we have these workshops. They told me in my workshop I don't need to worry about the worksheet. There's lots of time to complete it during the workshop, even though they gave it to me beforehand. I was stupid enough to actually listen to that advice, and I completed that graded worksheet during the tutorial, which was timed, which I didn't know, and I didn't complete it very well. So I lost like quite a bit of marks there, and those are easy free marks that I should have gotten.
Were you allowed to complete it beforehand?
You were, and okay. I stupidly didn't complete it. Like I only completed some of it. And after those 2 experiences, I was like, okay, I need to obsess over every little thing that I can control. Anything I can do from home, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Any prep for a lab, I'll do it. But just obsessing over that so you don't lose any small marks. That would probably be the biggest advice I can give you.
Sure. Yeah. One advice I'd give is, I think just to be confident in yourself and not to have that toxic competition with other people. Like, just be confident, know that and trust that you can do it. That's the main thing, because once you start obsessing over other people's achievements and other people's grades, that's when you're losing energy to other things, right? You want to focus everything on improving yourself and having your eyes locked on the goal. And there's really no point on focusing on other people, because the reason that they're in pre-med is probably the same reason as you're in pre-med, right? Yeah. So my advice is be confident, focus on yourself, have your energy and your eyes locked on a goal, and try your best. It may come, it might not come, but if you want it the most, you can have it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So
did you find that a lot of people were toxic and sort of gatekeeping stuff in your year?
Yeah. Okay. Time to spill spill the beans. So in my hall, there was 2 people. One of them on my floor, and they saw that I was working really hard, right? And they're just constantly making fun of me and belittling me, kind of, and sabotaging me, sort of just saying things, wording things in a way that's not pleasant to make me feel bad. And they were going for biomed as well. They were doing biomed and going for medical school as well. And I didn't know how to respond. But it just gave me more motivation to keep working harder.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's people who's watching, and there's people who's and I just kind of want to prove them wrong in a way, and they didn't get in, and I made it, so
there you go.
Who's won?
Yeah, it's like that Kobe Bryant quote, like pressure challenges.
Yeah, exactly,
an opportunity for me to rise.
Yeah,
that's so true.
Yeah, cool. And then finally, just before we finish, what are you expecting life to be like as a medical student?
Ooh. I've watched like a couple of your vlogs actually.
Sure.
I've seen
and the things that you've heard. Tell me about it.
I've heard the content gets there's a lot more of it. I've heard someone say 3 to 4 times the amount of content, which is extremely concerning considering that pre-med was already pretty hard. I've heard that the pressure is a different kind of pressure.
Yep.
That you don't need to get A+. You're not in competition with the person on your left and right. But you do kind of need to pass and hopefully get some better grades to unlock some more opportunities. But yeah, I've heard it's pretty stressful.
Sure. Okay. Yep. Let's take a break for now.
Sweet.
We'll move into the next section in a few minutes.